Richard, waiting outside, gave Ryan a rare nod of pride. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it meant more than anything he'd said before. Ryan didn't say much, just a quiet thanks. Because the victory wasn't about proving anything to his father. It was about proving something to himself. The story made headlines for a few days, but Ryan didn't focus on the noise. He started his internship quietly, head down, ready to work like he always had. No name tags, no shortcuts, just the same broke student mindset, grit, focus, and growth. And the lesson: sometimes the hardest path isn't about where you come from, but about how far you're willing to go without leaning on it. "I didn't lie," Ryan said, voice firm but calm. "I didn't bring up my last name because I wanted this opportunity for the right reasons. Not because of who raised me, but because of what I can do." Some heads nodded slightly, others stayed still, but the tension didn't ease. Outside the interview room, a notification buzzed on someone's phone. The tweet was catching fire. People were already speculating, calling it a stunt, a setup, even a publicity move by his father. No one knew the truth, and worse, no one cared. It was becoming a headline faster than Ryan could explain himself. Richard, still leaning casually near the doorway, checked his own phone and sighed. Looks like the world knows now. Ryan clenched his jaw. He hadn't asked for this. He'd spent the last 2 years living on scraps, learning from scratch, failing forward. And now a single moment threatened to wipe that away. The next words out of his mouth wouldn't just affect the job. They defined who he was, in front of everyone. Before Ryan could respond, another phone buzzed, then another. The assistant by the window glanced at her screen and her eyes widened. She quickly whispered something to Miss Carter, who frowned and tapped on her tablet. Moments later, she turned the screen toward Ryan. There it was, a headline already going viral. *Billionaire's son poses as broke student to land internship at mid-tier firm. But below the headline was something worse. A leaked email, Ryan's name, a partial resume, and a screenshot of an internal company message suggesting he was being fast-tracked for the role even before the interview. Miss Carter looked up, clearly troubled. "Did you have contact with anyone inside this company before today?" she asked. Ryan's face went pale. "No. I didn't even know I made it past the first round until I got the call last week." But no one looked convinced. The tension shifted again, from confusion to suspicion. What Ryan didn't know was that someone had hacked into the firm's system hours earlier, and his name had been flagged. It wasn't a coincidence. Then, the twist no one expected. Richard stepped forward, his expression darker now. "I didn't leak that email," he said, voice low, "but I know who might have." The room froze. Even Ryan stared at his father, unsure of what he meant. "I told someone in confidence that you were interviewing here," Richard added. "Someone who wanted to hurt you, not help you." And just like that, the story was no longer about who Ryan was. It was about who had set him up. Ryan's heart sank. "Who would want to hurt me?" he asked, voice strained. Richard looked at him, then finally said the name, "Your cousin, Max." The room went still. Max, once Ryan's closest childhood friend, was now a junior executive at one of Richard's rival companies. Ambitious, jealous, and always watching from the sidelines, Max had long resented how Ryan walked away from the fortune he himself had been chasing for years. Richard continued, "I mentioned your interview in passing. I didn't think he'd use it against you, but clearly he did." Miss Carter exchanged glances with the rest of the panel. The tone in the room shifted again, but this time not toward suspicion, toward concern. Ryan, still stunned, took out his phone and opened a message he hadn't noticed earlier. It was from Max, just 5 words. "Good luck staying anonymous now." That was the final piece. Ryan looked up, steadier than before. "I didn't come here to hide who I am. I just didn't want it to be the first thing you knew about me." He paused. "I can't control my last name, but everything else, that's all mine." Miss Carter sat back, studying him. Then she nodded slowly. "Thank you for being honest. That takes more than most." Everyone thought the storm had passed, until Richard's phone rang. He picked up, listened, and said just one word, "What?" He hung up. "Max didn't just leak your info," he said. "He hacked the firm's entire candidate system, and the authorities are already on their way." By the time the authorities arrived, the mood in the room had shifted from tension to quiet respect. The interview panel, once skeptical, now understood the full story. Ryan hadn't come in with privilege on his back. He came in despite it. Max's actions had only proven what Ryan had feared all along, that his last name could open doors he never asked to walk through and close others he was working so hard to earn. Later that afternoon, the firm issued a public statement clearing Ryan's name, confirming the system breach, and promising a full investigation. Miss Carter personally called Ryan to let him know they still wanted him for the position. "Not because of your name," she said, "but because of your voice, your thinking, your honesty. That's what we hire." He walked into the room with nothing but a second-hand suit, a wrinkled resume, and a quiet confidence that surprised everyone. No one would have guessed Ryan was anything but a struggling college student. He spoke humbly about working part-time jobs, juggling school and bills, and teaching himself coding late at night in a cramped dorm room. The panel was impressed. His answers were sharp, honest, and full of grit. He wasn't like the others. No rehearsed lines, no name-dropping. Just pure hustle and passion. The room started warming to him. This wasn't just another applicant. This was someone who had clearly earned every inch of where he stood. But just as the interview was winding down, and it looked like the job was his, everything changed. The door swung open. A man stepped in, sharply dressed, calm, and instantly recognized by two of the board members. It was Richard Langston, billionaire tech mogul, and Ryan's father. The room fell silent. Ryan froze. The air turned heavy. One of the interviewers leaned forward, eyebrows raised. "Is there something you'd like to tell us, Mr. Langston?" Suddenly, the story changed. Was he really the underdog he claimed to be? Or was this just a game, a rich kid playing poor to win sympathy? What happened next turned a simple interview into something no one in that room would forget. And Ryan? He had a choice to make, one that could cost him everything, or finally prove who he really was. Ryan's throat tightened as the eyes in the room shifted from him to the man in the doorway. His billionaire father gave a small nod, almost casual, like this was just another board meeting. But to Ryan, it felt like the floor had dropped out. He hadn't told anyone who he really was, not in school, not at this interview. He wanted the internship on his own merit, not because of his last name. The panel looked confused, maybe even a little betrayed. After all, they'd just listened to a story of struggle, of working night shifts and skipping meals to save money. And now they were wondering if any of it was true. Had Ryan just played them? What they didn't know was the truth behind the silence. Ryan hadn't spoken to his father in almost 2 years. He'd turned down the private college, the credit cards, the safety net. Not out of pride, but out of a desperate need to prove that he could build a life without being known as the billionaire's son. Every job, every class, every step, he'd done alone. But none of that mattered now, not with the shadow of his father hanging in the doorway. Richard Langston said nothing, just stood there with a faint smile, like he already knew what was coming. Ryan wanted to speak, to explain, but one wrong word could destroy everything. The room waited, and the real interview, the one that mattered, had just begun. The lead interviewer, Miss Carter, finally broke the silence. "Ryan, we're impressed with your skills. But why didn't you mention this connection?" Her voice wasn't angry, just guarded, the kind of tone people use when they feel they've been missiled. Ryan looked down for a moment, collecting his thoughts. He didn't blame them for asking. It did look bad. But how do you explain walking away from wealth? Not because you had to, but because you needed to prove something to yourself. He opened his mouth to speak, but Richard spoke first. "I just came to pick him up. Didn't realize I'd be interrupting. His voice was smooth, polished, the kind that filled boardrooms and press conferences. Everyone could feel it. This man had power, influence. And now the question on everyone's mind was whether Ryan had tried to quietly leverage that power while pretending to be just another broke student. What they didn't know was that Ryan and his father hadn't spoken since a massive falling out. A disagreement over values, direction, and the life Ryan wanted to live. Richard thought Ryan was wasting his potential by trying to make it the hard way. But for Ryan, it was the only way that felt real. Meanwhile, one of the other candidates, still waiting outside, overheard the tension and started texting a friend. Within minutes, the story was already starting to spread online. Billionaire's son fakes being broke for job opportunity. And Ryan's truth was slipping further out of his control. Further out of his control. Ryan could feel the shift in the room. The respect he'd earned just minutes earlier now felt like it was hanging by a thread. His heart pounded, not from nerves, but from frustration. He wasn't ashamed of where he came from. He was ashamed that it would erase everything he'd worked for. Miss Carter closed the folder in front of her slowly, clearly waiting for an answer, but giving him a chance to take control of the moment.